Welcome to The Explainer. Sometimes a single sentence can hold an entire universe of meaning. And today we're doing a deep, forensic dive, putting just one powerful verse from the Quran right under the microscope to deconstruct its meaning, its implications, and the profound lesson it holds.
All right, so here it is, Surah Al-Araf, verse 13. This is the verse at the very heart of our analysis today. And listen, this isn't just a line of text. Think of it as a divine verdict, a command issued right at the peak of a moment of cosmic disobedience.
So to really unpack everything this verse has to offer, we're going to take it step by step. We'll start with that initial command to descend. Then we'll get into a really fascinating theological debate. We'll also tackle a big question. Why does an all-knowing God even ask questions in the first place? From there, we'll look at how stories in the Quran work, the very nature of divine knowledge, and then we'll bring it all home to the ultimate lesson here, the lesson of arrogance.
Okay, let's dive right in. The very first part of this command is descend, or in the original Arabic, fahbit. So the question is, what does this divine edict really mean right here, in this specific moment?
You see, this command, it doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's not some random penalty. It is the direct and immediate consequence of what Iblis just did, or rather, what he refused to do. He was ordered to prostrate to Adam, and his arrogance made him refuse. It's a crystal clear cause and effect, an action of pride and a divine reaction.
And this is where things get really interesting from a theological perspective. Because when God says descend, you have to ask, is he actively punishing Iblis, or is there something else, something deeper going on here?
Yeah, this is the core of a major interpretive debate. Is God acting like a judge here, handing down a sentence for a crime? Or is he acting more like a physicist, simply stating a fundamental law of the spiritual universe? Is the descent a punishment for breaking a rule, or is it just the natural, unavoidable result of arrogance itself?
So scholars basically have two major ways of looking at this. View 1 sees it as what's called an amr tashri'. Think of it like a legislative command. You broke a law, the specific law about prostration, and so here is the specific punishment. But the other view, and honestly, it's arguably more profound, sees it as an amr takwini. This is more like a declarative statement about how reality is. It's not punishment so much as a declaration of fact. Arrogance and a high spiritual station are just incompatible. They literally cannot exist in the same place. It's like oil and water. They just won't mix. So the descent isn't a sentence. It's a diagnosis of a reality that Iblis created for himself.
Thinking about this whole punishment versus consequence thing naturally leads us to an even bigger question. If you look at the verses right before this one, God actually asks Iblis, why didn't you bow? Now think about that. If God is all-knowing, why would he ever need to ask a question?
And the answer is absolutely crucial to understanding so much of Scripture. God's dialogues with his creation are never for his own benefit. He isn't trying to find something out. His knowledge is absolute. So the conversation has to be for the benefit of the creation, not the creator.
So if it's not for information, what's the purpose? Well, the scholars point to a few really powerful reasons. First, there's a concept called itmam al-hujjah, which means to finalize the proof. It's about giving the individual every chance to speak, leaving them with absolutely no excuse. Second, the whole exchange becomes a timeless lesson, a warning for everyone else. Third, it makes the truth of the situation totally manifest, clear for all to witness. And finally, and this is so important, it forces the one being questioned to reveal their own inner state, to bring that hidden arrogance out into the open.
And this whole principle of divine dialogue, it's not a one-off thing with Iblis. No way. It's actually a recurring theme you see all throughout the Quran. It's a fundamental part of how the scripture teaches us.
And get this verse from the very same chapter just drives the point home perfectly. It says, everyone will be questioned. Not just the people who got the message, but the prophets and messengers themselves. Again, the goal isn't for God to learn something new, it's to create a complete, witnessed record of everyone's actions and choices.
So you start to see that these stories, or qisas in Arabic, they aren't just history lessons. They function like divine case studies. The story of Iblis isn't just about some event that happened long ago. It's a living blueprint of a spiritual disease, arrogance. It shows us through this dramatic, unforgettable narrative how it works and where it leads.
Okay, so to really lock in this idea of why an all-knowing God would ask questions to create a public record, we have to get a handle on a core theological concept, and that's the different dimensions of God's knowledge.
God's knowledge is absolute and timeless. But to help our human minds grasp this apparent paradox, scholars have distinguished between two aspects of that knowledge. It's not that God has two separate types of knowledge, but it gives us two ways to understand how his perfect knowledge interacts with our world of time and action. First up, we have what's called ilm ash-shahada, which you can translate as the knowledge of the witnessed. This is God's knowledge of things as they actually happen, as they become manifest in the physical world. The best analogy is like a perfect cosmic record of everything that occurs moment by moment. It's the knowledge of reality as it unfolds.
And then, on the other hand, you have ilm al-ghaib, the knowledge of the unseen. This is God's eternal, pre-existing, all-encompassing knowledge. He knows everything that ever was, is, or will be. He knows the end from the beginning. It's a knowledge that isn't bound by time at all.
So here's how it all clicks together. With his knowledge of the unseen, God already knew exactly what Iblis was going to do. Of course he did. But the questioning, the dialogue, that's all about bringing that choice into the realm of the witnessed. It's the process of making that internal arrogance a manifest action, a spoken word. Think of it like a trial. The trial isn't for the judge to figure out what happened. The judge already knows. The trial is to create an official public record, so the justice isn't just done, it's seen to be done.
All right, so we've walked through the nature of the divine command, the purpose of divine dialogue, and these different aspects of God's knowledge. Now let's pull all those threads together and get back to the absolute core of this verse, the spiritual sickness of arrogance.
What this verse does so brilliantly is it sets up this stark, powerful contrast. On one side, you have the internal sin, the feeling of arrogance, in Arabic, tatakabbar, this act of seeing yourself as better than others. And on the other side, you have the direct declared consequence, becoming one of the as-saghirin, the debased, the humbled, the humiliated. The verse draws a straight, unbreakable line from one to the other. Your internal state literally creates your external reality.
And this, right here, is the central takeaway. The real catastrophe for Iblis wasn't just that he disobeyed an order. I mean, people make mistakes and can be forgiven. His true, unpardonable downfall was the reason for his disobedience. It was the arrogance, the kibber inside him that convinced him he was above the command. That was the real poison.
And the verse seals this reality with one final crushing command, fakhruj. So get out. It's the final verdict. The consequence isn't just a demotion, it's a total expulsion into a state of disgrace. And really, what could be a more fitting end for a being whose entire problem was an inflated sense of self-importance? And all of this leaves us with a pretty profound question to reflect on, doesn't it? If divine questioning is designed to make our inner states manifest, if our hidden thoughts and feelings ultimately shape our destiny, what does that demand of us in every single moment? If the arrogance or the humility we carry inside will define our reality, what does true humility really require of us? Not just in our actions, but in the deepest, most unseen parts of who we are.